Christina, good to see you. Thank you for making a bit of time to come and have a chat. I know because we were just talking that you've been super busy with lots of things. So I appreciate you making a bit of time to tell me about what you do. I want to ask you about something to start us off that you mentioned when we spoke, I don't know, a week or two back. And it really interested me. You said, unlike most people, I want to use AI to predict the future rather than just react really quickly. I mean, that's a bold statement. Predicting the future is always a bold thing to do. So, I mean, I was impressed by that. What do you mean? What is it you're trying to predict, and why is it important in the context of what you're doing?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me. And when it comes to having a different approach when it comes to using AI, I have been in multiple positions when I needed to navigate incredible complexity,
Mhm.
and I have a quite an unusual career. I started as a musician, and then I transitioned through different fields, and I worked for an NGO as well as in finance. And I ended up working with scale-ups and startups. And I realized that despite the fact that I was changing my career, I can see that there were definitely some patterns. They change, however, they do exist, and they are in a sense predictable.
Right.
I started to analyze what was different about my approach. Why could I enter a new space and understand some of the rules? Of course, not all of them, but I could see something in advance. And then I realized that it's all very much tied to the fact that in my very first career, which was the longest one, as a conductor, I was trained to see what is happening in a little bit in advance. And I will give you an example how it works in real life. So you're in front of 100 people and you have the score. The musicians don't have the full score, they have only their pieces,
Yeah.
which reminds potentially of having worked in a big corporation when you might not understand as a worker what's happening and why do you do the things you do. So in an orchestra, it's slightly similar, but there is one big difference. If you play and if you're performing and not rehearsing, you are put in a situation where you can't be reactive. It's too late and it's too dangerous. So you're very likely to not be able to perform the whole piece. So as a conductor, you have multiple roles simultaneously. You need to be capable of understanding the ideas, like the bigger picture, but also to navigate mundane reality. Who needs to do what at a certain point? So it is a little bit about predicting,
Yeah, and
in
it's
essence.
very similar to the role of the CEO, isn't it? I mean, the
Yes,
orchestrating things is there's definitely
exactly.
parallels there. Let me, I mean, we'll talk about what you're doing with tech in a second, but I mean, you
Yeah.
mentioned that you built an orchestra and you were a conductor
Yes.
previously. Now, I've met a few people in the music world. Very few of them have jumped across from building an orchestra to building a tech business. I mean, just tell us about why you made that transition because it's a very interesting shift, and we're talking a bit about what you've learned from that. But why did you make that transition? What was it that inspired you to move into the kind of tech world?
Multiple reasons simultaneously. Some of them are calculated risks because the tech world is the one which is, even though it is quite unstable, but it is future proof. But also, as a kid, I really enjoyed technology. It didn't happen just overnight. I liked using Linux. I like learning about some elements. I wasn't that deep into technologies as a child because I was spending so much time building my knowledge in music, classical music. But I was always very interested in in technology because, in a sense, it highlights some incredible human potential. And slowly but surely, because I was exposed to different environments, I could see that there are some spaces where risks are valued and appreciated. And I think my personality very much aligns with that. And classical music, despite the fact that I genuinely liked being part of that world, I could see that being innovative is not as welcomed. So there are many different aspects, personal and not, which led me to slowly transition into tech. But the ultimate reason, despite all of that, was the fact that when I was working with startups, I quickly realized that I'm firefighting. And for some people, they enjoy doing that. And I like being slightly proactive. So I realized that there is no tool which exists to cover this particular problem and to solve it.
Okay. So, I mean, given that that's what you're now doing, I mean, tell us what Shiftloom does. I mean, in what area is it offering predictive help, if you see?
Yes,
I just tell us about
yeah,
Shiftloom.
definitely. So Shiftloom is an AI native company, and it focuses on predicting risks and potential failures in the operational side of a startup. We currently target predominantly seed and Series A companies, though in the future we want to expand to bigger companies. And what it does, the idea is simultaneously simple and elegant. So, given the fact that CEOs and founders and CTOs need to navigate complexity while they scale, they might overlook, not because they don't pay much attention, but because the system is so complex. They might
Mhm.
overlook some problems which could be, which are predictable in a sense. But because there are so many competing priorities, they might not see it coming. Though, if you are an outsider looking at someone's processes, you can already spot some elements in
So, give us
advance.
an example of something that would be very relevant to somebody scaling up a company. Just illustrate it with a simple example so that people get a sense of
Definitely.
what that means.
Yeah. We target three main areas. One is any issues with documents and budgeting. Another example is potential resignation and burnout. And the third element is any kind of executional side issues, such as knowledge gaps when one person is holding knowledge while the rest of the team relies on them. And all of that compounds and creates quite a dangerous environment. And it all depends on um, particular urgencies and priorities because they shift. So one day, a resignation might be one of the biggest issues for a CEO of a company. But let's say in 2 weeks, that might change because they've hired so
Yeah.
many new people. It's different.
Yeah. And I mean, how do you, I mean, I know you can't share information that's commercially sensitive, but how do you do that? I mean, is it, because those are complicated things. I mean, understanding whether somebody wants to resign or not. I mean, that is partly about how they feel at work, but it could also be about lots of other things. I mean, so,
Yeah.
and the other examples are interesting, finance and budgets. And I mean, they're complex. I mean, how do you work out? How
Yeah.
does it, what does it, I mean, does it give you a red flag and say this is a red flag for this person or this is a red flag on this budget? I mean, how does it kind of work? Is there a
Yeah.
dashboard?
Yes, so how it works is not the same as how it executes the tasks.
Right.
When it comes to the way it looks, it's not a dashboard, and it's a well-known fact that at this point, dashboards are seen as redundant and repetitive. So instead, it gives a list of warnings, and they're navigated through their urgency. You have like the most critical warnings, something which must be addressed today or in the nearest future. You also have amber warnings, something which is worth taking notes of, and you have something to monitor, potential issues, better to address it before it compounds. And also, in order to ensure that that information gives not just a warning, but more understanding, it also highlights the logic. Why did it decide to mark something as a potential risk, as well as the sources. And those sources are connected to the original stack. So if, let's say, a message on Slack was highlighted as a potential problem, part of that problem, you can click on it and immediately go back to your database and to see what exactly was flagged by the system and how the system sees everything. It's a very complex system. Of course, and without AI, it wouldn't be possible. That's why we are AI native from the very beginning. It has two major brains at the moment. It's going to have the third one as well. But at the moment, what it does, the first one is the analyzer, the one who looks into a founder or an exec's stack. Let's say you've connected Slack, Linear, and GitHub, and you're using them on a daily basis to navigate your business, especially if you're in tech. So the moment you've connected those tools, the system doesn't copy the information. We're read-only. We don't store someone else's company's information, and it looks into those systems and finds patterns. What's matching? How does it interact with each other? And it compresses the information. And then it sends that information, which it just analyzed, to another brain, which is the predictor. So you have the one who looks into the company and the one who thinks in advance.
Yeah. And so, I mean, let me just ask you. So, what you're really talking about is a more sophisticated way of monitoring what's going on, isn't it? I mean, you're using AI to monitor things in a lot more detail than you could do without AI. Are there? I mean, does it raise ethical questions? Would you say?
I definitely disagree with the term monitoring, because monitoring does imply some ethical, serious
So, if
questions.
you wouldn't use the term monitoring, how would you describe it?
Um, I would say it's clearly built to help. And monitoring implies that you must change the way you behave, or your behavior is going to be adjusted because of the way the system works. So and in our case, it's not the goal. The goal is to predict some failures and to help every employee to avoid any major failures, such as if you have one person who is exhausted
Mm.
and is possessing all the knowledge, yes, you definitely, as an owner of that business, you need to address it, but also that creates stain on that particular
Yeah.
person.
I mean, I'm not questioning your motives. I mean, I can see
Yeah.
that it's designed to help, and running and scaling a business is a complex business, complex game, and things often go wrong. I mean, I can see the
Yes.
logic for what you're talking about. I'm just wondering if it raises ethical questions about that process. That's all.
um yes and no. So the moment they understand how exactly it works, it changes
Mm.
the perception. And we don't we don't have any kind of tools which are connected to each particular person, and the stack doesn't work this way. The stack looks at the business. It doesn't look it has more of a tactical approach.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So, where are you going with this? I mean, what is it? I mean, how can I put it? What are you building towards, would you
Yeah.
say? I mean, where are you going with this? I mean, you've come a fair way. Where are you going? Give us a sense of the direction of travel.
Definitely. So at the moment, as I mentioned, we're targeting seeds and Series A
Yeah,
businesses,
yeah, yeah.
mostly because this is the environment I know about, and I know how it operates, and I can predict what kind of problems they're likely to face. And when training our second brain, which is not connected to any particular company, but it's a brain which is trained to analyze any patterns,
Yeah,
but still very specific patterns. Because I've mentioned for some companies, a resignation is a major threat.
yeah, yeah,
For
absolutely.
some, like especially if you're Series D, it depends what kind of resignation is happening. So, or let's say budget drift, higher you go, more complexity you have when it comes to documentations, more likely that you're going to experience that. So it all changes, and in my understanding, the future would be that we will have the system would work in a very similar way, but will be tailored to different sizes of businesses.
Right. Okay. So, what is it you're trying to achieve then? I mean, is this a piece of technology that every Series A company should be adopting? I mean, give us a sense of what success looks like.
Definitely. So at the moment, we don't have any major players in the market who are targeting this particular problem. There are definitely some competitors, but their focus is different. It's
Right.
either they are interested in looking and analyzing and predicting in their own stack, but there is no tool which binds everything together and creates a whole holistic picture of the company. And that's why I definitely think the company should be adopted by as many CEOs and founders as possible,
Mm.
because that's about survival, especially when it's a seed or Series A company.
Yeah. And to achieve that, I mean, what is the main challenge that you're going to have to overcome to achieve that? I mean, I can see your point. I mean, because what you're
Yes,
saying is this is a piece of tech that reduces risk for scaling up.
yeah,
I mean, I get that.
yeah.
What would you say is the major challenge that you're going to have to overcome, the crux challenge to get to where you want to get to?
Scaling, finding as many businesses who are willing to back us, because it will have a compounding effect with others. And you've raised some ethical questions. So with other companies which are selling a slightly their business model and the service they offer is not as complex, and it doesn't require a high level of trust because the task itself is not that complex. In
Mm.
our case, we're getting access to sensitive data to the whole
Yeah,
company
yeah,
because so
yeah.
many tools are connected. So building that trust is incredibly important. And at a certain point, I can see that it will be a compounding effect. One after another company opens doors for us, because we've documented everything when it comes to our subcontractors, how we process data, and any concerns are addressed. But still, it's high risk, so that requires trust, and that trust needs to compound and build into something
Yeah, yeah.
which can
I mean,
scale.
what you're saying is, if you want people to take a big risk, there's got to be a lot of trust there. I mean, I see the logic of that, and you're also saying that the more people trust you, the more people have got reason to trust you. So that's
Exactly.
yeah. But those are
Yes.
those are time consuming. I mean, it takes time to build trust, doesn't it? I mean, you don't just do it overnight. I mean, it's like having babies. I mean, sometimes they take 9 months, don't they? That's just the way they are. They take 9 months. Trust, you don't build trust overnight. It takes time.
Yes, and that depends. So this is a question I wanted to address. You mentioned what kind of customers, what kind of IT companies we want to work with. However, what I haven't mentioned is the fact that I'm heavily focused on the United States.
Right.
And at a very certain point, I realized, mainly because of the work I've conducted and because of how much contact I have with our CEOs, I quickly realized that Europe is not the place where I would build this company.
And let me ask you about that. Is that because people are in America, investors and CEOs are more willing to take a risk on you, or is it that they're more trusting, or is it the opposite in Europe? I mean, are people less willing to take a risk? Are they less trusting? I mean, to come back to your point about trust
Yeah.
and risk and the balance, I mean, is America better for that reason, would you say? Is that what you're
Um,
trying to get at?
The United States suits us better in some particular aspects, such as it's not that American businesses are more trusting someone more.
Mhm.
They are more willing to take a bet on you and to test it and to
Mm.
see if it works. Even before saying no, there are more people who are willing to at least try. And we've discussed timing. So let's say a simple conversation, which is going to take me like from point A to point B in the UK or in Europe would take me approximately 3 weeks, happens in days in the US.
And why
And
is that? That's really interesting. I mean, why is it so much
yeah,
quicker? I mean, why,
culturally,
that's a really interesting point. That why does it
yeah.
happen so much quicker? What is it about America that enables that to happen?
A few things, a few reasons, which are compounding and create such an interesting, saturated environment. And I lived in multiple countries, and that includes the United States, the
Mm.
UK, Ireland, and what I've seen is that in the United States, because they were willing to take risks much earlier, they've compounded wealth, and they've compounded extra money which they can invest in companies which are not have not proven themselves yet, but they can at least afford taking risks. Also, culturally, it's very different, not just the financial side. Americans by default tend to be more open to ideas and outsiders, because that's a country which is based on that and on those values. And yes, of course, systems, there are some rigid systems in the United States as well, but the general attitude is that it's better just to try.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting point you've made there. And just to pick up your point about the fact that America is based on immigration, I mean, why does that? Because that's a really interesting point. Why does having lots of immigrants? I mean, America, as you just pointed out, is essentially based on immigration, isn't it?
Yeah, yes.
Why does that encourage people to take more risk? I mean, what is it about
Hmm.
those kind of immigrant communities? I mean, for example, there's a big Irish community, there's a big
Yes.
Italian community. I mean, I've got friends in both, in New York, for example. I mean, why would you say those communities are more willing to take risk? Why are they less risk averse? What is it about that? Because that's a very interesting statement.
Yeah, and in this regard, you can see that countries like the United Kingdom are closer to the US than to other places like Switzerland. And there is one particular reason, is that if you have a population which is a significant portion of your population which comes from an outside country,
Yeah.
that means that those people are either someone who came with means and they had social security and financial means to survive that change, which is always very traumatic since you're
Yeah,
losing
yeah,
your ground. But more often than not, you have dreamers. You have people who are willing to take risks, who are willing to work hard and to prove themselves. And more often than not, they need to do that twice as hard. So you have a huge concentration of people who had to prove that they deserve staying in that country. And that creates a compounding effect. More people you have like that, the more you encourage people who are willing to bet on
yeah.
some ideas and to move with them and to progress and to sometimes to sacrifice quite a lot,
Yeah.
but willing to do that.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's,
yeah, and in countries which are isolated when it comes to immigration, they might have fantastic systems, but they tend to be quite rigid and very risk averse because those systems
yeah.
are very solid and they're stable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting point you made. I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment about ecosystems, the entrepreneurial
Yes.
ecosystem around here, around Oxford and in
Yeah.
the UK. And I mean, there's very little discussion of the role that migrants play in that. I mean, we've had a tradition here in the UK of making it difficult for migrants to come here in recent years. And
Yeah.
that probably has quite a negative effect for the reasons you've just outlined, which is a very interesting point. Let me ask you about, I mean, you've talked about what Shiftloom does and what you're trying to do
Yes.
with that. Tell me about building a business. I mean,
Yes.
how do you, I mean, we've talked about your previous experience building an orchestra and
Yes.
conducting. You're now building a business. I mean, do you feel differently about those processes? I mean, how do you feel about building a business? Is it better than building an orchestra? Is it different? I mean, in what way? How do you feel about the change?
I would say it's in some aspects it's very similar because some behaviors are similar. The way you navigate challenges, the way you need to make decisions, prioritize, see the picture as clearly as you can, and also being under constant pressure. That's
Yeah,
very similar. The
yeah,
way the mechanism works is slightly different because in case of an orchestra, you don't you don't need to take as many risks as you do with a startup.
Hmm.
Because especially if that's an AI native startup, things go wrong, you fail, and you need to fix it. In case of an orchestra, it's more linear and in a sense more predictable. Still very volatile. So if I were to build a company, a startup, without having that previous experience, I
Hmm.
think everything would feel very different for me.
Yeah.
And yes, that would be a much bigger challenge. So, so I was quite surprised to see how much in common it has.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things I think is very interesting about the role of the CEO is that, I mean, other people contribute. You know, your finance people help you with manage the money. Your HR people help you manage the people. The tech people help you manage the tech. The job of the CEO, I sometimes call it the chief everything officer, is to kind of figure out how to make the whole thing work. And
Mhm.
because every company's different, the role of the CEO is different in every company. I mean, there might be
Yes.
similarities, but you've got to do different things because you've got to make it work in the right way for that company, not yesterday's company but this one. How do you work out what to do and what not to do? I mean, how do you judge we're going to do this, but we're not going to do that? Those sort of decisions
Yeah.
are always, I mean, how do
Yeah.
you do that?
And I think again, my previous experience helps me because building and scaling an orchestra teaches you how to take responsibility for your actions, and also
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
prepared that you would constantly make decisions which might not be completely understood by the rest of the team. And when it comes to prioritizing, sometimes it's just quite clear based on previous experience
Mm.
and based on some just calculations what needs to be addressed first. And something comes up and that changes the whole dynamic. And I think having prior experience helps me believe that my judgment is correct because I've seen it work before. And though the environment is different and adjust to this
Mm.
environment, there's still like you need to make a decision. You need to prioritize sometimes um, to decide, do you prioritize yourself or do you prioritize the company? And sometimes you understand that by not prioritizing yourself at all, you stop prioritizing the company as well because
Mm.
it's so attached to you. So it's not there is no rule which will help navigate it. It's trial and error, mistakes and corrections, but it's much, you still can navigate it making decisions which are likely to benefit you in the future.
Yeah. I mean, we'll come back to mistakes in a second, but
Yes.
what would you say are the most difficult decisions you've had to take?
In life or in this
Well,
particular
I was thinking about the company, but I mean,
company?
any decisions are fine.
Yeah, because they're very much connected.
Yeah.
I think that priority, um, because these are competing interests, and sometimes what the company needs, it's not the same as people who work for that company need.
Mm.
And sometimes I need to make some concessions and compromises when it comes to my own life because I understand that I just can't do, I need to help the company, and especially now when it's in this stage when growing it's survival. So those decisions, and simultaneously you can burn yourself to the ground and
Mm.
it will not be good either. So knowing when to push through and when you need to stop, and that comes to many decisions. Some hard decision when it comes to people
Mm.
you work with and having very, very difficult conversations and making some decisions which might be quite difficult, but in the future that will help the company and me as the founder
Yeah, they're difficult judgment calls, aren't they?
very much.
Which decisions have had the biggest impact on the growth of the company, would you say?
Surprisingly enough, and this is, as I mentioned, my previous experience helped with that. But when you just start, you might have an idea, and
Mm.
it's alright that it will change inevitably. It's absolutely
Companies
normal.
evolve, don't they?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you more you test it, more you work with customers, more you understand that you need to adjust many elements, which is all right. This is how it's supposed to be. What's surprising is that division potentially is one of the most underrated element.
And why do you
And
say that? Why do you say that that's the case? I mean, just explain why.
definitely. So more often than not, there is that people will say how they see the company in the future and they will have some milestones like 1 million era and it's yeah it's quite clear, but simultaneously it doesn't address a fundamental question: how exactly you want to see it, what kind of business do you want to have, hyperscale or not? What kind of ethics do you want to instill in your company? What kind of directions you want to take? It all depends on how you envision it from the very start. And I've seen it with the orchestra. How ambitious you are, and where do you want? Do you willing? When are you willing to stop? When do you think like that's a line I don't want to cross? And it sounds quite counterintuitive that when you just start, you already think about the future in 5, 10 years. But we know examples of people who've established fantastic companies and they've lost everything because they've overlooked one particular clause in their
Mm.
document.
Yeah.
So that's surprisingly that how exactly it helps navigate the reality. If you have a very clear understanding of what you want to achieve, where your boundaries
Yeah.
lie, and what's important, what's not, you will make decisions. You will attract investors who are more likely to match with what you need, and your growth will be more coherent with what exactly you want to
Yeah.
achieve.
Yeah. I mean, there's that saying, isn't there? If you don't know where you're going, any road will do. I mean,
Yes,
you're saying the opposite. To know where you've got to know where you're going to be on the right road, which is what you're
exactly.
saying. And there's a lot of sense to that. And given your point about the vision thing, I mean, I understand that. How do you then go about getting stuff done? Because it's one thing to have a great vision.
Yes.
The real challenge is making it happen. I mean, what's your approach to getting stuff done?
Um, I haven't mentioned that fact, but when I started playing piano when I was 5 years old,
Right.
and as a 5 years old kid, I didn't have much choice but to practice daily. So that kind of discipline, which I've underestimated my entire life, thinking that everyone thinks the same way, everyone has
Mm.
that that experience. It helps me immensely. I know how to work. I'm used to being under pressure and performing. Doesn't matter what's my condition, how do I feel, especially as a conductor. And that I was a conductor for many years, as well as a founder of an orchestra. So it builds some kind of resilience, but also a work ethic, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
very strong, and it's integral in my case.
Yeah.
And with age, I've also learned that hard work needs to be combined occasionally with some rest time.
Yeah, it's got to be sustainable, isn't it? It's very interesting your point though, because I mean, your point was about discipline, and what you see are people that have been very high standard athletes, people that have been very high standard musicians. What they understand is the importance of discipline and the importance of practice.
Yes.
I mean, nobody goes on to win Wimbledon without playing a few practice matches. And it's the same. Nobody goes to conduct an orchestra without rehearsing quite a lot. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about sports people and musicians is they understand the discipline and the power of practice and how that influences, performance. And one of the reasons they're often very successful as entrepreneurs because those things have a big impact in business. Often people go into business and they don't have the discipline, they don't do the practice, and then they wonder why things go wrong. So it's a very interesting point you're making, I think.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is that because as a 5 years old kid, you are failing on daily basis. You
Yeah,
try to play, nothing happens. You practice again and again and again. You learn just by pure practice that at a certain point you will manage it. You will navigate it. So as much, and I think my character is slightly more a impulsive person,
right.
but I also grew up having that experience of just grinding
Mm,
and knowing that it does you will achieve it. It's a matter of time. So yes, I will be very much frustrated, but I also have the deep understanding that it just takes time. And
yeah,
I also navigated having that understanding that it might take me more or less time, and I can't predict how much exactly it will take me, but I have those tools since I was 5. How to I know how to learn.
yeah,
And so that's very different, and I'm absolutely confident it's very similar for athletes, because in our cases, in case of athletes, they need to overcome their mm, mental blockers
mm,
and to push through. In case of music, it's also about overcoming some blockers, like you're learning to play a piece and nothing is working out. But in essence, you learn from the very early childhood that it's a matter of time.
Yeah, you just
You
have to
will,
push through problems, don't you?
yes,
You know,
yes. I think we
it's the
have,
discipline to do that.
yeah, we have the opposite problem, I guess. High performing musicians and athletes might not know when to stop because we
Mm.
are so used to finding a solution. And sometimes the solution is go somewhere else, do
Yeah,
something
yeah,
else.
that's a very good point, actually. I mean, often people are so determined that they can't take people with them, can they? Let me ask you, I mean, you mentioned a second ago about making mistakes. I mean,
Yes.
what sort of mistakes have you made?
Um,
And what sort of impact did they have?
that's an interesting question because I wanted to say it all depends on how you define a mistake.
Mhm.
So if a mistake is something which is irreversible, maybe maybe I still need to know how to navigate it. But if a mistake is something which you could correct, you can change later, I think that's a learning curve. That's I wouldn't call it a mistake
So if you
because you
would, so
grow
what
from
would you
that.
call it?
Challenge, a roadblock.
Mm. I mean, what's interesting is that people say, okay, I'm going to do X, and
Yeah,
X doesn't work out. So they come
yeah,
back and say, okay, well, now I'm going to do Y because X didn't work out, so I'll do Y. And that's one kind of mistake, right? And that's the usual one. There's
yes,
another kind of mistake that I think is also very interesting, which is when people say, I'm going to do X. And really, what they should have done was something completely different that they didn't even think about. They didn't even
yeah,
explore. They just, so it's, if you like, there are errors of commission when you do the wrong thing, and there are errors of omission when you just really didn't even think about the thing that you should have been doing. You did something completely different. I mean, they're two very different kind of mistakes. I mean, I'm wondering if if you've made mistakes of those types.
yeah. Clearly, I made all types of mistakes in my life. And one might say that it was a mistake to become a professional musician because I ended up quitting it.
Mm.
I genuinely don't see it that way. And quite often, I'm quite surprised when people see it for a perspective that something was left. No, I've gained an immense understanding of a system which is incredibly complex and challenging. And I worked under pressure for many years from my early 20s. So I definitely don't see it as a mistake. I think that it taught me something which helped me build my future now
Mhm.
my nowadays reality. I think I think mistakes are mostly things you don't learn from. So if you try to navigate your business and you see that one particular approach doesn't work out and you
Mhm.
come and you repeat it over and over, that's a mistake.
Yeah.
And this is why, and I've mentioned that as a professional musician or as a professional athlete, you learn to to be determined, and maybe you will at a certain point make mistakes like that, just spending too much time on something you shouldn't.
Mm. I mean, I think one of the things I like about entrepreneurs is that they're pretty quick to spot when they've made a mistake, and
Exactly,
they're quick to change direction. Because if you don't, if you don't sort it out pretty quickly, you go bust.
exactly.
But I think your point is that you also see people doing this, repeating the same mistakes, and I mean
Yes,
that's was it somebody famous? It might have been Einstein said, doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome is a sign of insanity, isn't it? And you see that occasionally. I mean, I see it often with people repeating the same, doing the same things. They're doing
yeah.
marketing, for example, that doesn't work, but they keep doing it because they don't know what else to do. And you think, well, maybe maybe it's worth spending time exploring other options, but people can get a bit tunnel vision sometimes.
And that's an interesting question because sometimes that conviction is something which is going to help you later. There
Yeah,
are many, many companies which survived on conviction only,
yeah.
mostly on the CEO's conviction. It's because so many ideas which disturbed the environment, disturbed the industry, they sounded like ideas which should not exist. And the only reason, now let's say an example of Airbnb, like the idea is sounds all right. Yeah, you just rent out your place. but it did not exist until it became
Yeah,
real.
yeah. And a lot of
And there
people were
is
very skeptical, weren't they?
exactly, and that skepticism, and I think more disruptive the idea is, more skepticism there will be.
I think a lot of people would agree with that. Let me ask you about the kind of implementation part to that. I mean, how do
Yes,
you, I mean, it's one thing to make a mistake, it's another thing to learn from it. When you've got a team of people,
yes.
I mean, if you to come back to your orchestra example, you've got a whole bunch of musicians. I mean, how do you make sure that people generally in your team are able to learn from those mistakes? I mean, how do you translate a piece of learning in here to a piece of learning that changes the behavior across the business?
I think it's essential to remember that not everyone will be on board with you, and not everyone will learn. Not everyone will be
Mm,
willing to learn. So you pick your battles, and because you're stretched already, you decide what you're going to prioritize and who do you want to focus on the most. And people who trust and who believe in you are likely to understand and support you, even though they might not fully see why you behave the way you do. But also, you need to clearly send the message that I'm willing to be bold, I'm willing to make mistakes, but the moment I see that it doesn't work out, I will course correct myself or the business. And that's very important. So you have two elements. In one hand, you take accountability, responsibility, you act
mm,
as a bold person with conviction. But on the other hand, you have humility because even the best idea, but executed incorrectly, will fail. And
yeah.
this is where teams are crucial, especially the moment you scale, you push for those like early stages, and you need to have a very strong team of people who are capable of holding you accountable, especially as a CEO, but also having good judgment.
Mm, mm. And good judgment, often you can only see it in hindsight, can't you?
Yes, but it can be predict. You can predict it as well, in a sense. Again, since I had a co-founder before, I know what kind of qualities work well with me, what
Mm.
kind of personalities work well with me, and that helps.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you about come back to building the business. I mean, to what
Yes.
extent has building the business stretched your expertise? I mean, to what extent has it got you out of your comfort zone, doing things that make you feel uncomfortable and, pretty challenged by?
I would say it's extreme. Your whole personality changes, and you reprioritize your life. You
So
change
you
the
would
way
say,
you.
sorry, you would say your personality changes. I mean, in what way
Yes,
would you say that then?
um, because the tension, pressure, and responsibilities are very serious,
Yeah,
and that makes you think how you spend your free time because you don't have much free time.
yeah, okay.
So that creates tension because people who used to be on board with you before, when you had a bit more of leisure time, more resources, that
Mm,
changes that dynamic. And you also want to ensure that that time is spent in a very sensible way because, again, you don't have much spare time.
mm, mm.
You don't have weekends
Yeah,
and you can't take them. And if you feel bad, and I will give you an example. Recently, I went for bereavement, and the same day, I needed to complete a few tasks. Not because I felt simultaneously compelled to do so,
mm,
because I felt that I'm contributing to something which is alive, which helps me, which is my future. But I also felt that it's absolutely awful, but I need to complete that task.
mm. They're difficult
And
choices sometimes, aren't they?
exactly.
Yeah.
And and it's not like I could have postponed it. I didn't want to, and I found some energy to complete the task the same day.
Mm. I mean, I think it's interesting. One of the things that I like about entrepreneurs is that they are, I mean, they're very determined on the whole.
Yeah,
And sometimes that spills over when they become a bit obsessive about it. I'm not saying you're obsessive, but you see that people can't let go. I mean, and because partly because they enjoy it, partly because it's become their way of life,
yes,
partly perhaps because they don't want to do the other things. I mean, I'm a good example. I don't want to take up gardening. It's just not something that I want to do. I know lots of old blokes like me are into gardening. It's not going to be my thing.
yes.
So it's those are interesting choices, I think. Um, Let me ask you some other stuff just before we wind up there. So when you look, I mean, when you look back over what you've done, I mean, what would say the big things are that you've learned from, you know, the journey that
Uh,
you've been on?
Many, 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 many things. So I would say that surprisingly, and we've discussed this just now, it makes you recalibrate your whole personality. For some people, it just destroys their personality because they're so determined
Mhm.
they become blind. But also the fact that I needed to address some serious questions, ethical questions, to draw some lines to understand where I stand as a human being, how determined I am.
Mhm.
I haven't expected that because when it comes to building business, since it's not the first time I'm building something, I I know what to expect. I recalibrate myself. I still understand these are the rules. It's transactional. Here is like there isn't some kind of a manual for that. I wasn't expecting that that kind of learning will happen.
And has
Genuinely
that,
didn't.
and that's a very interesting point. Has that made you a better decision maker, would you say? Because you're more, you've invested time and energy in thinking things through in a bit more depth about what you want and what you don't want. Would you say that's made you a better decision maker or a worse decision maker?
No, in my case, clearly a better decision maker, and I would say that it made me more attuned to how people make decisions, what kind of consequences decisions have, and it made it more clear that there is even structure to decision making as well, and you just become very attuned to the way it is working, and you learn more and more that that process will help me in the future as well. It definitely because of the pressure and also because of having constant feedback in a sense. Like in some areas, you might build something, but you are not facing reality as quickly. You don't have that soundboard which is going to challenge you immensely.
And what have you, I mean, been talking about decision making. What would you say you've learned about getting stuff done? I mean, there's always two bits. There's making the decision to do something and then there's getting it done,
Yes,
isn't there? I mean, those are two fundamentals of building a business.
yes.
And you've talked about how you've changed as a decision maker. In what way have you changed in relation to getting stuff done? Would you say you're better at getting people on board now to help you do things? I mean, what would you say about getting stuff done? I mean, what have you learnt about that?
Yeah, I've learned that done is better than perfect,
Yeah.
and because that's a learning curve, and that's when you do something, you don't make mistakes, you learn. And it will take you some time. Sometimes you understand it very quickly, sometimes you don't, but it's still you're moving on, you're
And
progressing.
is that different from being a musician? I mean, mine, tell me I'm wrong, or I could be wrong about this, but mine, when I look at people playing the piano, and they do an almost perfect recital. Certainly to my eyes, you think, God, that is
Yes,
perfect. There's a difference between what you're saying, which is like I play the music perfectly, and in business, just need to get it done, and I accept that it's not perfect. I mean, that seems to me a bit slightly bit of a difference there. It's
yes.
how important is that? Would you say, in that shift?
It's um it's essential. It's because the difference is drastic and fundamental, and I had to learn it. I had to switch to keep what I needed to keep from my past as a musician, that determination, work ethic, but simultaneously, yes, I think there are these worlds are very different. They do exist on this planet, so there will be very many similarities, but the attitude towards risk, which we've discussed, as well as understanding that it's not, it will never be finished, it will never be perfect, nor it should be.
Mm.
Because perfect in a sense means stagnation. It's not a museum. It's not a piece of art which was completed and you perform it. It's a lived organism with many people being part of it, with a system which is changing constantly and it's unpredictable. And at any point, you might see a new player coming into this industry and just changing everything.
Mm.
So if you have that mindset of perfect is your goal, you're
Yeah.
very
I
likely
mean,
to see that that's not the case in tech.
yeah, I mean, in one sense, I guess a piece of music doesn't evolve. I mean, it is what it is, isn't it? I mean, it might be
Never.
reinterpreted, but it's a piece of music. A concerto is a concerto. I mean,
Yes.
and I guess the question is how well do people play it and how effectively do they interpret it? A business evolves. I mean, they just, well, I mean, even if you didn't want them to, they just do, don't they? I mean, businesses just, they have a life
Yes.
of their own, I think, sometimes because customer expectations change, staff expectations change, what you want to achieve changes, the
Yes.
resources you've got available. So businesses are a kind of a moving feast. They're kind of
Exactly.
constantly evolving, which means that approach needs to be different, I guess.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I started to question staying in classical music to begin with. There were many reasons why I was questioning it. But when I've established, I co-founded the orchestra, I could see the future and I could predict how it might look like. And I thought that I have quite a good understanding of what's going to happen. And I could see in advance all the plateaus, all the possibilities, and they're finite. And I was questioning, do I want to stay in an industry which might not suit me well? Because I do like that feeling of changing, learning, and evolving.
Mm. I mean, in one sense,
And
businesses are limitless, aren't they? I mean, it's somebody described
yes,
it the infinite game, isn't it? I mean, you know,
yes,
they are endlessly changing, I think, which requires a different mindset. A couple more
yes,
questions just before we wind up. So, if you were, I mean, if you were starting from scratch,
yeah.
is there anything you'd do differently this time round or second time round?
Mm. Yes. It For me personally, I don't think I would, because I needed to learn. For others, it all depends on their personality because we're so different. Some of us are very determined, and that
Mm,
might blindside you. Some people need to be bolder and they need to take more risks. So it all depends on what is your Achilles heel,
mm.
what needs to be
And what
addressed
would you say
first.
your Achilles heel? I mean, you mentioned it. What would you say your Achilles heel is?
No comment. The interview answer. I'm too determined and I'm working too hard, like something like that.
Yeah, okay. That's a good. I mean, I'll ask you about that some other time. One last question. If you were to offer a piece of advice to a rookie
Yes,
CEO, he's kind of asking the same question in a different way. If you were to offer a one piece of advice to somebody starting out, what would it be?
yes. Think in advance. What are your non-negotiables? What are your morals, principles, and all the lines you're willing to cross or not willing to cross ever? It will help navigate this environment, the world, and it will make help better decisions because they will be aligned with that vision
Yeah.
and there will be less mistakes.
Yeah, no, and Christine, that's a great piece of advice to end the interview on. So thank you for that. I mean, it's always a joy. I've really loved chatting to you, and thank you for, like I said at the beginning. I mean, thanks for making a bit of time in your schedule to come and have a chat because it's such an interesting thing that you're doing. The business is interesting, and the fact that you've transitioned in from building an orchestra. I mean, I've not met anyone that's done that before, and it's so different and so interesting. So
I
thank
hope you
you.
will never meet someone who's done
Well,
that.
maybe not. No, but thank you for being willing to share that because it's
Thank
been
you.
absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
All right, see you, Christina. Bye bye.
See ya.